everybody. We're happy and excited to welcome you to the 6th meeting of Eastern Circle's Geopolitics Club, where we will explore the past, the present, and the future of the post-Soviet region. This discussion season, this cycle of conferences, is devoted to the theme of power transition, and our country today is Azerbaijan. This conference today has been organized in partnership with Diplomacy magazine. So tonight we will discuss both internal issues and foreign relations of this country, which has undergone an intense and oil-sponsored development since its independence in 1991, notably under the leadership of one family, the Aliyevs. We are delighted of the opportunity to discuss these issues tonight with two distinguished speakers, Bayram Balci, who is the director of the French Institute of Anatolian Studies and researcher at the CERI CNRS. He's a specialist of the Turkic space from Turkey and Central Asia, and notably working on relation of Islam and politics in post-Soviet republics such as Azerbaijan. Our second speaker is Ido Vock, international correspondent at the New Statesman, who will share with you his impression from his last trip to Azerbaijan from last December, right after the conclusion of the peace agreement with Armenia. Given the limited access to reliable and critical information and the spectacular means of communication deployed by the country's leadership, we are especially grateful to hold this discussion with knowledgeable experts and people who have first-hand information on current developments in Azerbaijan. And our editorial board has prepared a set of questions that will tackle the following topics: national identity, the nature of the regime, economics and energy, as they are very much intertwined, international developments, regional relations in general. Finally, we will make sure to treat all the questions that you may have. We will ask you to please write them down either in the Zoom chat box or as a comment under the Facebook live stream. Our team will collect them and we'll be able then to address them directly to our distinguished speakers. As a reminder, I will kindly ask you to please mute your microphone for the whole conference. So let's begin. The first topic that we would like to address tonight is the topic of national identity. As we have seen in the trivia questions, there are actually much more ethnic Azeris outside or living outside of the state of Azerbaijan than inside the state, which confuses a lot of people. For instance, also in Russia, the external ethnic view on Turks, Azeris, Azerbaijanis is very much the same. They are all considered as Turks. Also, the first president of Azerbaijan, Alfu Bazalchi Bey, wanted to shape the country following the secular pan-Turkic ideology, which was not developed with the Aliyev. So we thought that it would be important to get this fact clear, and therefore I would like to ask Bayram Balci, who is the specialist in the matter, what does it mean today to be an Azerbaijani? What is the difference, how it differs from being an Azeri? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor for me to be with you from Istanbul. Hello, everyone from Istanbul. I'd like to answer the question for the first time I'd like to give a definition of Azerbaijan, because you know that Azerbaijan, according to the modern etymology, was the name of Azerbaijan. This comes from the Atropat under the Achaemenid Empire. It was very old. It was the name of the province at this time, a very large province covering contemporary Azerbaijan and part of Iran. But the name of Azerbaijan was the first time adopted for the area for the new Todi Azerbaijan by the government of Musavat in 1918, after the collapse of the Russian Empire, when the independent Azerbaijan Democratic Republic was established in 1918. And until then, the designation had been used exclusively to identify the adjacent region of contemporary northwestern Iran, while the area of Azerbaijan Democratic Republic was formerly referred to as Aran and Shirvan. But today, the name of Azerbaijan, in terms of modern identity, designates the people who live in Azerbaijan and the people who live in one or two provinces of Iran. In reality, in terms of ethnically, meaning the Azerbaijani is not very, how to say, doesn't designate something very strong, because if you ask the people in Azerbaijan, what does the meaning of Azerbaijan? For some people of Azerbaijan, they prefer to be called Turkish Turk, because in fact, previously, the term of Tatar and Turk was used to designate the population of Azerbaijan. And today we have, in fact, two main national identification in Azerbaijan. Some people in Azerbaijan, they prefer the term Azerbaijani. They would like to reinforce the notion of Azerbaijan. And for the other people, they prefer to be called Turkish Turk, because for them, it doesn't make any difference between them. And for them, they give a priority to the Turkish, to the designation of Turk, like to be close to Turkey. And the first president of independent Azerbaijan, Aliyev, for him, it was very important to designate Azerbaijani Turk, because he wanted to create a sort of same union between Turkey and Azerbaijan, and Turkey and all the Turkic countries in Central Asia and in the Caucasus. And in today's, but we have the feeling that for Aliyev today, the priority is to have, of course, good cooperation with Turkey and with other Turkic countries, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and other, but at the same time to give a sort of, to reinforce the identity of Azerbaijan, because they don't want to be completely absorbed by Turkey and by the notion of pan-Turkism, because for them, if they want to be a sort of sovereign state, independent country in the international sphere, it's important to reinforce the notion of Azerbaijan as a new and modern country. But and I don't know if you remember in the recent Second Karabakh War, when Turkey supported very strongly Azerbaijan. For some people in Azerbaijan, there was the fear that if Turkey continued to support Azerbaijan, the risk that in the future Azerbaijan will be dependent from Turkey. And this is something that in Azerbaijan, some people, they don't want, because they would like to preserve the specificity of Azerbaijan, specificity in terms of history, in terms of language. Of course, the language is very close. The difference between Turkish of Turkey and Turkish of Azerbaijan is not very important, but at the same time, some of them, they want to preserve this specificity. We could compare this linguistic proximity between Turkey and Azerbaijan to the proximity between French and they speak in Quebec. The comparison is possible, I think. And I think in the future, we will probably see a sort of Azerbaijan desiring to have good relation with Turkey and the Turkic countries, but at the same time to preserve the specificity of Azerbaijan. As you know, there is a sort of Turkey Council. Turkey Council is a sort of pan-Turkist organization created by 6 countries: Turkey, Azerbaijan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and recently it was extended to Uzbekistan. And despite this sort of pan-Turkism, each country wants to preserve its specificity. And at the beginning, in 1991, when Turkey established relations with this country, with Azerbaijan, and with the other countries, Turkic countries, and they didn't realize, the Turkish policymakers, they didn't realize the importance of this ethno-nationalism in these countries. But now, I think, when Turkey wants to cooperate with them, they try to respect the specificity and the desire of sovereignty for these countries. And in the future, I think we will have this sensitivity in Azerbaijan and the countries, and Turkish policymakers, I think they will continue to respect this specificity.
Thank you very much. I think this is very much clear for now as the interest at stake when it comes to defining the Azeris and the relation with Turkey, which leads actually to my second question, which is related to religion in general. As we know, today Islam is the dominant religion in Azerbaijan, although it's not the only religion present in the country. So my question would be now, how has the Azerbaijani state relation with religion evolved, and what does it tell us about external influence in the country? Could it be Turkey? Could it be Iran, for instance?
Yeah, in terms of identity, in terms of religious identity, Azerbaijan is interesting because Azerbaijan is the unique Turkey country to be Shia in its majority. So if you know the history of Azerbaijan, previously Azerbaijan was part of the Iranian Empire. It was part of the Safavid and Qajar Empire of Iran, and the power was sometimes dominated by Turkic elements in Iran. That's why, and as the Shia was established a sort of official religion in Iran with the Safavid in 1501. Because of this, now the majority of the population in Azerbaijan is Shia. You have a sort of maybe 80% of the population is Shia and 20% is Sunnite like Turkey. But at the same time, during the Soviet period, the Soviet regime, they tried to eliminate the border between, to eliminate the difference between Shia and Sunni, and because of the atheism, because of the policy against religion, against Islam in the period, for a lot of people in Azerbaijan, the difference between Shia and Sunni was not very clear. But when the country became independent in 1991, it became easily for people to practice religion. We have seen a sort of competition between Turkish, Iranian, and other influences to try to influence the Islam in Azerbaijan. And in Azerbaijan, in fact, despite the fact that in terms of identity, religious identity, it's more natural to cooperate with Iran, in fact, the Azerbaijani authorities, they prefer to have good cooperation in the field of Islamic revival with Turkey because they consider that Turkey was a sort of Western country, and because they consider that it's more important to be Turkish than Islam. That's why the Azerbaijani government, and at that time I lived at 2 years in Azerbaijan, I remember for the official authorities, they tried to cooperate more with Turkey than with Iran. And they asked the Turkish government to send them some imam to open a sort of religious establishment, faculty of theology. And the Turkish official Diyanet, which is a sort of Ministry of Religious Affairs, they received in Turkey a lot of people from Azerbaijan to make new religious elite. But at the same time, some people, Iran was very important, influential in Azerbaijan because of the history of cooperation between the Shia leaders in Azerbaijan and in Iran. And a lot of people went from Azerbaijan to Qom, and to Mashhad, and to Tehran for religious education. But despite this, we can say that in Azerbaijan, the population is very secular because of the long Russian and Soviet domination, the population is very secular, and religious practice is not very important like in Turkey or not in Iran. And for the Aliyev regime, the priority is to preserve this atmosphere of pluralism, this atmosphere of secularism, and that's why they try to control the development of religious studies. If you want to open a sort of madrasa or Islamic school, you have to ask the authority the permission to the government, and for the government, the priority is to create a sort of good atmosphere between the state and the religious organizations. And this secularism a la Azerbaijanese is in fact a sort of control of the government on Islamic practice, Islamic organizations. And we can say that this is the same method in Turkey, in the sense that the secularism is not exactly separation of religion and state, but a sort of domination of the religious sphere by the state in Azerbaijan. Of course, I could develop on this religious, because we have at the same time not only state actors, but even private or non-governmental organizations that have contributed to the Islamic revival in Azerbaijan. But I don't want to spend all the time, all the 2 hours to speak about religious affairs, because we have so many other issues to develop in this conference today.
Thank you. Hopefully we'll have questions from the audience that will enable us to get back to this topic as well. But for now, I would like to move on to another topic, internal politics and current developments. And for this, I will turn to Ido Vock, who has recently been to Azerbaijan, and especially in the part of the reconquered territory in the last Karabakh war. So I would like to first give you the floor to tell us what are your impressions about this journey that you had upon the invitation of the government.
Yeah, so thanks very much for having me. It's a great honor. Yeah, so I was invited to Azerbaijan in early December because essentially the government felt that its side of the story was not really being told. So it had been fighting, well, it had just won a war with Armenia over the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh, which I'm sure many of our listeners and participants will be familiar with. So essentially, it had just, after the fall of the Soviet Union, this territory called Nagorno-Karabakh and also some surrounding territories had been essentially occupied by Armenia. They were under international law de jure Azerbaijani territory, but were controlled and functioned as a kind of de facto extension of Armenia. And so that had been the case for 30 years, since the early 1990s. And late last year, the Azerbaijani government launched a very spectacularly successful attempt to recapture the territories, which it largely did. So now there is only a kind of rump of, under the terms of the ceasefire agreement, there's only a rump of separatist territory left, controlled and kind of secured by Russian peacekeepers. And the Azerbaijani government essentially felt that it wasn't getting its side of the story out. It wasn't, Armenia had been more open. Armenia is objectively a freer, more democratic country. Even Nagorno-Karabakh was a republic, the kind of separatist republic was a democracy of sorts. Obviously, not kind of, it's not Sweden, but it wasn't Azerbaijan either. And so journalists had much more access to the Armenian side of the conflict, both physically and sort of intellectually, in terms of getting the story from Armenia out. And the Azerbaijani government found that it was losing the PR war. So they hired a PR firm from London, and the PR firm got in touch with me and asked if I would be interested in going to Azerbaijan, and I said yes. What I saw was a not particularly polished attempt by the Azerbaijani government to show its side of the story. And if you read my whole piece, which if you're here, I would encourage you to do, you will see my impressions of what I saw. But essentially, my view is that my impressions of Azerbaijan were of a dictatorship that was not particularly comfortable with scrutiny, and was attempting to put forward its narrative to journalists who are more used to being able to challenge these issues. It wasn't particularly able to do that. But I'm open to any more specific questions.
Among the people that were invited, actually, among journalists, were they actually targeting Western journalists, or do you have among the people with you on the trip people from other countries as well?
So I'm not really sure about journalists invited to Azerbaijan in general. But on my trip, it was basically Brits and French people. There were 2 French journalists and I think 3 Brits, including me. And I think it was one of the first. I'm not sure if there were subsequent trips. I would imagine, based on the success of this trip, possibly not, or at least not with this PR firm. But I know that there have been not a ton, but there's a Le Monde journalist who writes pretty regularly, or actually several of them who write pretty regularly from Azerbaijan and from Karabakh. I know that the New York Times Moscow team have been to the region, actually, and the Turkey team also. Yeah, but at least for this particular trip, it was Western journalists. And I think the reason for that was that the Azerbaijani government felt that it wasn't getting a fair hearing from Western media because of factors both real and less real.
Do you know why, for instance, they led you to go to Agdam, for instance? Why this village? What did the government of Azerbaijan wanted you to see in this city?
So we wanted to go to various places in Karabakh. So Karabakh is basically there is the old Soviet Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast, which is like what it was under the Soviet Union. So essentially it was a kind of an autonomous region of Azerbaijan populated by ethnic Armenians. But that does not correspond to what we call Nagorno-Karabakh in contemporary terms, which is that oblast plus 7 surrounding regions. And so the oblast was majority Armenian during Soviet times, but the surrounding 7 regions were almost entirely ethnic Azerbaijani, and those ethnic Azerbaijani territories were basically ethnic cleansed by Armenian forces during the war. The ethnic Azeri, ethnic Azerbaijani inhabitants were expelled and forced back to territory controlled by Azerbaijan as IDPs, and so that was about 10% of the population, and still is about 10% of the population. And so we wanted to go to places that had more recently been kind of changed hands, or so for instance Hadrut, which has always been an ethnically Armenian town, and basically all the inhabitants fled, and today, as far as I know, I'm not 100% sure, but as far as I know, it's essentially a ghost town. Or Shushi, which the Armenians call Shusha, the Azerbaijanis call Shusha, sorry, which was a mixed town, and during the war, during the First War of Independence, during the First War after independence, was ethnically cleansed of Azerbaijanis. Sorry, I'm all over the place. Was ethnically cleansed of Azerbaijanis, but then during the Second War was ethnically cleansed of Azerbaijanis, and then during the Second War was ethnically cleansed of then Armenian inhabitants. So we wanted to go to these places, but the government wasn't particularly comfortable with that, and our repeated requests to go to these places were rebuffed, and so we were brought to these places that had been ethnically cleansed in the 1990s, had been basically ruined. So you can see Agdam, which was a very, very pretty big, I think something like 30,000 inhabitants, possibly slightly less, before the First War, and had been just completely ruined by, unfortunately, Armenian kind of looters. I think the houses were ruined for the raw materials. So the only building left standing in the city is the mosque, which, so you can see one of the minarets in the photo there. Yeah, there we go, that's the mosque. But the entire rest of the town is completely ruined. And I think they wanted to bring us here basically because they weren't particularly comfortable with us going to towns that had basically just been ethnically cleansed. So if you go to Hadrut, or Shushi, you would have had the traces of life of 30 years that would just have been erased. As I talk about in my piece, and I'm sure we'll get onto, I don't really think there is a particularly realistic chance of Armenians ever living under, at least in the short to medium term, living under Azerbaijani sovereignty, and so these places will simply be rid of their former inhabitants. So they're much more, the government is much more comfortable bringing us to places where the Azerbaijani side is unequivocally sort of the victim, as in Agdam, compared to places where it could be criticized for its conduct, such as places like Hadrut or Shusha.
So they prevented you from going to places where it would be sensitive for them to portray what happened in the last war, by emphasizing on what happened in the First War and portraying a sort of revenge narrative This actually leads us very much to the next question, which are more related to the nature of the regime of Azerbaijan itself. As we've seen, the communication campaigns are quite impressive. I mean, on the surface, Azerbaijan has all the attributes of a modern state, but we know that at the same time, numerous journalists, politicians, bloggers are either imprisoned or kidnapped in the region, also abroad. So this leads to my question to whoever wants to answer, is about the political landscape. What does it mean in Azerbaijan to be the opposition? Is there a systemic or non-systemic opposition? How are the counter balances power to the ruling country translated in practice?
I would like to give a sort of precision. In fact, if we compare Azerbaijan to other countries, it's sort of post-Soviet regime, and it's similar to a lot of regimes that we have in Central Asia, in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and other. But in Azerbaijan, the regime is still a little bit a sort of authoritarian regime. It's not. Unfortunately, the democratization has not been completed in Azerbaijan because we have still the same regime, a sort of post-Soviet authoritarian Soviet regime with the same dynasty at the power since 1993. Because previously, during the first years of the independence, there was a sort of pluralism. But unfortunately, in 1993, when Aliyev became president, we had the same regime with him, and then with his father, and his sort of dynasty, presidential dynasty. The regime is not free at all. The media are not free, and the elections are not really plural and democratic and transparent. They tried to modernize the country, but unfortunately, it's still the same. And I'm not sure that in the future, in the coming years, the regime will be more open, because if we compare the situation in this country to the Arab countries, the fact that the Arab Spring was a sort of catastrophe for the region, and the fact that the democratic aspiration of the Middle East, unfortunately, this aspiration were not very successful. That's why it has a sort of negative impact for some post-Soviet regimes in Azerbaijan because of what happened in Arab countries. I think the regime has more, how to say, liberty, in the sense that the opposition, the democratic opposition in Azerbaijan, is a sort of it's discredited because when they want more democracy, the regime can tell them that look at what's happening in the Arab countries, Arab Spring, and that's why in the future the regime will be more and more strong. And I'm not sure that the next election will be free and democratic. And there is the risk that we will continue with the same president, or maybe with another another leader coming from the same family, the Aliyev family.
Thank you very much. This is very, very clear. So you were talking about these dynasties, and what would be interesting for us to know about maybe the evolution of the country in the future, as you said, that we'll have to prepare for them the next leaders. So what are the weights? How is this family structure? What is the role of each of these family members or members of this extended family circle?
Yeah, in Azerbaijan, there is a sort of clanism, in the sense that you have a sort of solidarity between the people who come from the specific region, in the sense that the clan of Karabakh or the clan of Nakhchivan is very strong. The dynasty comes from Nakhchivan because the Aliyev, the father and son, they were born in Nakhchivan. But at the same time, there is something very important that I would like to underline, is that we don't have to exaggerate this phenomenon of clanism, because, of course, in the Soviet period and even before that, during the Russian and before the Russian domination, clanism was very important relative to the country. Similarly, in Kazakhstan, in Turkmenistan, in Kazakhstan, it was the competition between different Jews. In Turkmenistan, it was between different tribes. In Uzbekistan, similarly. But in Azerbaijan, I think that the new leaders, despite the fact that they came to power with the solidarity of the support of their clan, now the leaders, Aliyev, the father and the son, Ilham and his brother Haidar, they try to eliminate this clanism because they want to preserve, to modernize their countries. And I don't think that now the clanism is something very useful to explain the political landscape of Azerbaijan. It was very important that because of the efforts by the president, the clanism is not so important in the culture of the country. And in the future, I think the clanism will disappear in the coming 5 or 10 years.
Okay, thank you very much for this precision. This is actually important for us to get the full picture. So there's this need to get rid of this clan vision in order to also portray a modern state. But this modern state, how is it structured? How, to what reach does this family has influence on either the political, but also the business landscape and social spheres as well? How much is now the identity of the country connected with this family, for instance?
I think that in Azerbaijan, the family of the president has controls a large part of the economy in the country. This is very problematic because if they want to modernize the country, they have to create a sort of more justice in the repartition, in the share of the wealth of the country coming from gas, from oil. But the problem is that they wanted to modernize the country, but I think they have some difficulties because of they need at the same time some people to be reliable, to be loyal to the government, and that's why they have to give them some privilege in the country. That's why I'm not very optimistic for the future of the country in the sense of that they will not have any possibility to modernize and to break the monopoly of the clan in the country in the future.
How do you imagine then future power transition to be implemented in Azerbaijan? Will it be like again to the son, or could it be interesting for this family to portray more pluralism in appointing or electing another person from the close family?
I'm afraid I'm not that well acquainted with the actual political science of it. But what I can say on the point of legitimacy is I think you could have argued that the Aliyev regime lacked popular legitimacy before the war, but it seems, based on my trip and based on my conversations with Azeris and both people who were inclined to support the regime, but also oppositionists who'd been persecuted and in some cases thrown in prison, tortured. The fact that the war and the loss of particularly the territory surrounding Karabakh, but also Karabakh itself, had been such a raw wound for 30 years, and it had been such a kind of national humiliation and it affected so many people because it was 1/10 of the population. It was about 600,000 people. So the population of Azerbaijan at the time was, I think, more or less 6 million. So it was about 10% of the population. It was such a national humiliation. It affected so many people and it became a kind of totemic item of national pride and the ability of the government to maintain itself. So Tom de Waal, who's kind of one of the definitive scholars of the Caucasus, talks about how in the mid-1990s, the leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia at the time were close to making a deal on kind of trading territory. And so Armenia would have got Karabakh and then would have traded a bit of territory in return. And the generals of Azerbaijan essentially warned Aliyev Senior that he would be overthrown in the event that he did that he agreed to give up Karabakh. And so I think that gives you a kind of idea of how totemic this is and how essential to the regime the Karabakh issue was. And the fact that Aliyev Jr. reconquered most of Karabakh, he certainly could have gone on to conquer all of it. The only reason he didn't, I think, is because it's pretty obvious it would have ended in ethnic cleansing at best and more or less genocide at worst. And so, but he easily could have gone on to capture Stepanakert and the entirety of the territory. There was absolutely no reason for him, as no kind of military imperative for him to agree the ceasefire with, or the shaky peace agreement with Armenia and Azerbaijan. But the fact that he recaptured these territories, the 7 territories surrounding Karabakh, large parts of the former oblast, really meant that he kind of reclaimed a lot of his legitimacy as a leader. And although Azerbaijan is not a democracy and, you know, one of the most autocratic states anywhere in the world, this is such a totemic issue, and he and Aliyev really kind of recaptured, shored up his regime with this military campaign.
Thank you very much. Bayram, Balci, would you like to follow up on this?
No, it was, I have the same opinion. I don't have anything to add to this question.
I think we will have the opportunity actually to come back to this point, also with the fact that now Russian troops are involved in the territory of Azerbaijan. So we'll discuss in the last part of our discussion about these specific issues and what it means actually for the Aliyev ruling family. So now we've discussed a lot about the men inside the Aliyev family, but I would like to address a specific questions to the role of Mehriban Aliyeva, so the vice president of Azerbaijan, also wife of the current president of Azerbaijan. What is her role in the power, both locally on the local scale, but also internationally? As we know, she has also the Aliyev Foundation, which is also a diplomacy tool. What is, but it's less known, what is her role within the country?
I think she was designated number 2 in the regime, and vice president in Azerbaijan. It's very important, but and this decision was very criticized by the opposition in Azerbaijan, and because the idea in Azerbaijan was to give a sort of modern image of the country, because they wanted to show to the international community that Azerbaijan is a very modern country. Women are respected in Azerbaijan. It was the first country in the Islamic world where the women had the possibility to vote, even before Turkey, before the reforms of Atatürk in Turkey. That was the strategy to give a sort of modern image of the country. But at the same time, I think that it was not very popular because it was criticized by the opposition and even by the population. I don't think that in the future the regime the country will be will be under the supervision of Mehriban Aliyeva. So I'm not sure that the population of Azerbaijan is ready to accept such a thing, because still the Azerbaijan population is a little bit conservative, and the population is not very happy with this sort of dynasty. I think the objective of this reform, of this decision by Aliyev, was to give a sort of modern image of the country, but I don't believe at all that the next president of Azerbaijan will be Mehriban Aliyeva, because the current president is young and he can still stay in power for maybe 1 or 2 mandates, and after that there will be probably the possibility to give the power to his son, because he has children, but in that time we will see, because if the opposition tries to organize to sort of create something to give a sort of modern country, but I don't think that this will be possible for the next election. For the next election, we will certainly continue with the same president, maybe in 10 years. we will have a sort of a new atmosphere in Azerbaijan.
Thank you. That's very clear. We have seen in the trivia question that most of the Azerbaijani economy is based on the oil exports. For instance, actually, it was the plan of Ilham Aliyev himself, who said in 1998 that he wants to use oil for one major goal, to become a real country. Well, I think he meant here to be a modern country. So it's true that in 10 years, between 2005 and 2014, the GDP of the country rose tenfold, which is quite impressive. But yet now, notably with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has led to negative oil prices in the spring of 2020, the GDP of Azerbaijan, as it's much dependent on the energy, has been very much battered. As we know also, oil is a capital intensive kind of business, but not a job intensive one. So when we look at the youth unemployment in Azerbaijan, it actually stood by 14% before the pandemic, while the overall rate in Azerbaijan is quite low. It's around 5%. But still, this youth unemployment also is leading to a risk of brain drain, which brings a lot of challenges for the country in this context. So my next question would be, what is the state strategy for post-oil economy for diversification, if there is one? Actually, the question could be, is there, as the Aliyev strategy for the diversification of the economy?
Yeah, because I think that in Azerbaijan, the country, the leadership of the country, the president of Azerbaijan, the elites are very aware on the fact that they cannot continue to develop the country with oil and gas with energies because of the price are declining in the last years. That's why they try to create a sort of something alternative to gas and petrol to energy sectors, and they try to create a sort of to develop tourism, not only tourism but to create a sort of national industries, because in the future they know that it will be difficult to continue with the same energy sector because of the decline of this energy. And but I think they will have the same problem, not only like in Saudi Arabia, in Kazakhstan, in Russia, in everywhere. But in Azerbaijan, I think they have some resources because the country started to invest even before the crisis. They started to invest in different sectors in tourism industry, and that's why and they in the sphere of services. That's why I think they will have some possibility to resolve this problem, and they have still the migration with Russia. So that's why they try to preserve good relations with Russia, because for them it's really important that some people can continue to go from Azerbaijan to Russia to work, and for the population it is something very important. And the other thing is that they try to transform Azerbaijan, as they have not only to produce but at the same time to transport energy from the Caspian Sea to Turkey and to Europe. In the future, they will probably try to convince Azerbaijan, to convince Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan to prepare the option of the transportation of the energies from through Azerbaijan to the country, and it could be sort of solution in the future for Azerbaijan.
The only thing I'd add to that in the context of relations with Russia is there was, I think, pretty transparently an attempt during the Karabakh War for Azerbaijan to kind of push out Russia's influence and to, in an ideal world, replace, or at least have Russia be in competition as the kind of external hegemon in the region with Turkey. And obviously, Azerbaijan is quite a lot more favorable to Turkey for a bunch of reasons, not least kind of cultural and religious and linguistic affinity, because Azerbaijani and Turkish are very similar languages, and there's the common saying, one people, two states, and so on. But actually, it didn't really end up being that successful, I don't think. So if you look at the situation now, there are Russian peacekeepers on what is internationally recognized as Azerbaijani territories, which means that Russia has a military presence in all three countries of the South Caucasus, where previously it only had two. So there's a Russian base in Armenia. Russia militarily occupies the Georgian territories of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and now there are Russian troops in Karabakh, so on land that is kind of internationally recognized as Azerbaijani territory. And so, although there was, I think, a wish and a desire to have Turkey be in competition with Russia as the kind of hegemon, it doesn't really seem to have panned out in quite the way that perhaps Azerbaijan and also Turkey would have hoped.
Thank you very much. These are really interesting remarks. I actually wanted to tackle also the implication of Russia and the necessity of having good relations with the northern neighbor of Azerbaijan, notably not only in the field of conflict but also in the energy sectors. With the recent Sokar southern gas pipeline, well, Azerbaijan will now be able to export natural gas to Europe, around 10 billion cubic meters, which is something, but nothing in comparison to what Russia exports to Europe. It's about, in comparison, 1/16 of the flow that Russia sends to the continent. Azerbaijan now is becoming a new player in the gas market, not only the oil market, but has launched projects supply the demand of Europe in gas. Does this impact the relation with Russia?
So I think that's a very important point for Russia, but not only for Russia, but even for Iran, because now as Azerbaijan is becoming a sort of actor player, and for the security of gas for Europe, it's Azerbaijan very important. That's why previously it was very easy for Russia to manage Azerbaijan, but it's not very easy now because because Azerbaijan has become a very important gas, oil, and natural gas production. This first one. The second is that Azerbaijan managed to create a sort of multi-vector, very dynamic foreign policy. They have good relation with Europe, with Russia, with Turkey, with Iran, with a lot of countries. And that's why in the future, I think Russia will continue to try to integrate Azerbaijan in its Eurasian Economic Union. But I don't think that Azerbaijan will agree, because for them, this is a symbol of independence and sovereignty, and they will continue to utilize all their resources in order to develop it to be more and more independent from Russia. And this is something that Putin understand. We have seen this in the Second Karabakh War, that Putin's options were limited, and he had to compose to deal with Azerbaijan, because he knows that Azerbaijan has become very influential in the region, and in the future, this is something that Russia has to deal with it in the coming years.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'd also add, actually, I was surprised when I went to Azerbaijan. I would have expected that Russia would have been seen more or less the same on the Armenian side as the Azerbaijani side, and I say that because Armenia is formerly a member of the CSTO, so the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is kind of an ersatz NATO, and it has a collective, it has an equivalent of Article 5, so an attack on one is an attack on all. So in theory, if it had worked politically, Armenia could have expected military support from Russia after it was attacked pretty much unprovoked by Azerbaijan. Now, of course, that didn't happen. Russia gave signals that it would probably not be prepared to tolerate an attack on Armenian soil proper, but it was ready to stand by and let whatever was happening in Karabakh, which was not Armenian soil, take place. And so I would have expected that Armenia and Azerbaijan would have been seen as would have seen Russia as kind of a fairly neutral actor. But actually, what ended up happening, because it didn't step in to defend Armenia, it only kind of all negotiated this ceasefire deal towards the end of the conflict. But actually, Russia is very negatively seen in Azerbaijan today because it's seen as being on the side of the Christian Armenians, and it's only because of Russian peacekeepers that Azerbaijan wasn't able to conquer the whole of Karabakh. And it's very positively seen in Armenia because it's fairly positively seen. Although it didn't come to the defense of Armenia, it nonetheless allows the self-declared Nagorno-Karabakh Republic to continue existing, because otherwise it would be overrun by Azerbaijan. And the Russian peacekeepers are preserving the status quo. So I was quite surprised, actually, and I think that kind of portends the future relations with Russia. And I think Bedros is completely right to say that Azerbaijan will continue drifting further and further away from Russia in the future.
My questions will actually go back to your impressions, Ido, of your trip. Right after the conclusion of the ceasefire, we have seen lots of communication efforts from the Aliyev government, also to portray this new peace into a project of reconnecting the region, the connectivity of the whole region. And you made a comment on this about notably the Armenian communities living in that were living in these territories around the former oblast of Nagorno-Karabakh. The state of Azerbaijan made extensive communication on saying that they would provide integration measures for these communities, notably by bragging a little about the Baku market, for which would be more attractive for the agricultural sectors. As we know, most of the people, Armenian communities in this region, were living from apricots and agriculture, and they portrayed that they would offer them better options than what Yerevan could provide. But what is your impression? Do you see any minimal prospect of integration or even rehabilitation of this population inside villages in the places where you've been?
Right, so you can take two aspects here. The first is you can look at what Azerbaijan has been saying about wanting a kind of, I think, I forget what they call it, but this kind of regional forum which would bring in all three countries of the South Caucasus, and I think Iran and also Russia. And that would kind of allow cooperation across the region and also economic integration. And Azerbaijan has been quite open about saying that we want trade liberalization with Armenia, we want them to trade with us, and hopefully eventually that can create some kind of fellow feeling, potentially leading to normalization between two countries which are possibly the most kind of hostile mindset of any two neighboring countries anywhere in the world. And then there's also, and so I think that's one thing, and I think probably like possible. I don't know specifically how likely it's to be, but obviously increased trade is in the interest of everyone, and Armenia is in a position of weakness, and you know it's a landlocked country and so on. So, and actually it needs to cooperate more and more with Azerbaijan because its infrastructure has been significantly changed. So if you think about, for instance, there's one road that goes to Karabakh which now crosses, I think, through what was the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic and is now controlled by Azerbaijan. So obviously Armenian interests are having better relations, improving its relations with Azerbaijan because it's in a position of weakness. And the second question is, can Armenians as people, as communities, as Armenians ever live in Azerbaijan under Azerbaijani sovereignty, with an Azerbaijani flag, you know, guarded by Azerbaijani police, by Azerbaijani soldiers? The Azerbaijani government says that it wants to do that. It wants Armenians who previously lived in Nagorno-Karabakh to live as Azerbaijani citizens. It says it can offer them political autonomy, cultural autonomy, kind of very high levels of autonomy. So Hikmet Hajiyev, who's an advisor on foreign policy to the president, kind of he's a very slick media operator, speaks very good English, knows, actually, I think he was educated in Belgium, or went to university in Belgium, so he knows what Western audiences, Western ears like to hear. He is kind of very, very open on this point, and he says the Azerbaijani government wants Armenians which they consider their citizens to live as Azerbaijani citizens. But of course, this would require overcoming basically 30 years of kind of state-sponsored hatred on both sides, but because we're talking about living under Azerbaijani sovereignty, then obviously it makes sense to focus on Azerbaijan and Azerbaijan's role in this. And I mean, you go there, and Armenians are referred to as the enemy. Azerbaijanis seem very, very skeptical. Ordinary Azerbaijanis seem very, very skeptical about living together with Armenians, having them as fellow citizens. And I suppose it comes, the point I tried to make in my piece is that it comes down to the wider point of, well, no one's got very many rights in Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan is a very, very repressive country. It's ranked, I think, 11th least free country in the world, joint 11th. So no one has any rights. So if you're Armenian, you know, one of the tenets of kind of democracy is the protection of minorities. And if you don't have democracy, then you don't have the protection of minorities either. And so I think Armenians are a very, very, very long time away. It's a very distant prospect of them ever living in Azerbaijan.
Yes, I have one last question that is also connected to rebuilding the connectivity in the reconquered territories and the involvement of Turkey, for instance. We have seen some pictures about big infrastructure projects, such as the realization of the Fizuli airport in the southern part. And the Aliyev government is saying that Turkish subcontractors are actually getting involved in these projects, saying that they want to, for instance, to promote tourism in the region. So we have seen that tourism was one of the sectors that could be a way to diversify their economy. But I would like to ask, what does it hide? Is it purely a commercial project, or what is the real reason for Turkish, either Turkey as a state or Turkish businesses to get involved in projects in the reconquered territories in Azerbaijan?
Yeah, this is a very important question, because as we have seen that just after the end of the war, the Azerbaijani government decided to develop, to construct roads, bridges, and airport. I think this have a sort of domestic dimension, because for the regime, he promised the Aliyev, he promised to liberate the occupied territories and the Karabakh when he came to power. Something he promised in opposition to his father, because his father decided he wanted to liberate the country, the territories, but he couldn't manage to liberate them. So for Aliyev, Ilham Aliyev, this is sort of victory, and for him, he would like to utilize this second Karabakh war victory in order to reinforce his power and to be more popular in Azerbaijan. And I think he's popular because this is something that was the liberation of the Karabakh and the occupied districts was a sort of consensus for all the population and political elites for the opposition, for the government in Azerbaijan. In that sense, it's a real victory for Aliyev, and he will continue to utilize this victory to reinforce his power in Azerbaijan. This is the first one. The second is that for Turkey, Turkey was very influential. As you know, in the first Karabakh war, Turkey was supportive of Azerbaijan, but only in the diplomatic sphere. But in the second war, Turkey was very active support of Azerbaijan by giving them some military support. And for Turkey, the objective is not only to show a sort of solidarity with a very important country, with Azerbaijan, but at the same time to create a sort of connection, economic continuity, economic connection, economic opportunities between Turkey and Azerbaijan, and not only Azerbaijan, but at the same time with the Caspian Sea, with the Turkic country, Turkic world. And thanks to if they manage to create the corridor between on Nakhchivan, for Turkey, it will be a sort of continuity from Istanbul to Nakhchivan to Azerbaijan, and then Turkmenistan and the rest of the Turkic country, and it will be sort of reunification, a sort of integration between Turkey and the Turkic countries. That's why Turkey was very active for the liberation of the Karabakh and the connecting and the other districts occupied by Armenia. And in the future, I think we'll see a sort of Turkish business developing between Turkey and Azerbaijan and the rest of the Turkic country in the coming months and years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we will move on to the questions from the audience. Very luckily, we have one question that is much connected to what you just developed on, related to the countries of the Eurasian Economic Community. So Azerbaijan, as you said, is not very democratic country, especially among the former Soviet republics. But what sort of relationship do these countries, such as Belarus, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, have with each other within this Eurasian Economic Community?
I think for Azerbaijan, when this economic union was created by Russia and Kazakhstan, one of the members was supposed to be Ukraine, but because of the crisis between Ukraine and Russia, because of invasion of invasion of some territory of Ukraine by Russia, in the future, of course, Ukraine will never be member of this union. But at the same time, now they wanted to replace, to integrate Azerbaijan in this union. But I don't think so. I don't think that this is something interesting for Azerbaijan. For Azerbaijan, they think that this economic union was created by Putin in the objective of recreation of sort of new Soviet Union, or at least a sort of new Russian domination on the former Soviet Union countries. That's why Azerbaijan is not interested at all. For Azerbaijan, the priority is to be independent, important leader, and to have good relation with Turkey, with Russia, with the West, with China, with Iran, with all the countries. And I don't think that in the future they will continue to be members of this union, because this is something not interesting at all for Azerbaijan. And there is a sort of consensus, even for the opposition. The opposition doesn't want to be more integrated with the Russian economic union, because this is something they know that it will be a sort of new supremacy of Russia on Azerbaijan, and they don't want this again to happen.
The Eurasian Economic Union has, and all the kind of associated post-Soviet kind of supranational institutions have always been pretty transparently an attempt by Russia and to kind of maintain some of its influence over former members of the Soviet Union. I mean, it's not a secret. And so I think Azerbaijan is pretty open about wanting to move away from Russia. It hadn't been for a long time, but the conflict last year was a very, very kind of explicit, open attempt to move away from Russia and towards Turkey and towards some other countries, and to assert its independence more, which it hadn't done for almost 30 years after the fall of the Soviet Union. It had been content with Russia as a neighbor and Russia as a kind of hegemon in the region. So I don't see why Azerbaijan would want to move away from that. I think the direction of travel is pretty clear. The direction of travel is away from Russia and towards, as Bayram said, towards kind of other Turkic countries, perhaps Turkic-speaking countries, towards Turkey especially, which has been increasingly assertive on the world stage, not only in the South Caucasus, but also in Libya, Syria, and so on. And I don't see any reason for that to change.
Very interesting. We actually have a question that is related to the relation of Azerbaijan with countries of Central Asia and with oil or gas-rich states, especially Turkmenistan, for instance, as the Trans-Caspian gas pipeline comes online to deliver gas to the EU. What are the relations? What are the prospects of this cooperation with Central Asian countries?
To be honest, I'm not an expert of this of the energy issues in Azerbaijan and the Caspian Sea, but we have the feeling that for Azerbaijan, because in fact they would like to export the resources they have to Europe and other markets, but the cooperation with the Caspian, the Central Asian countries, it's not necessarily something good for Azerbaijan, because it should be a sort of competition between them and other countries. That's why I think for Azerbaijan, the priority is probably to try to convince other countries to export the energy through Azerbaijan and then to Turkey and Europe. But I don't think that Russia will be ready to accept this, because Russia would like to convince the other countries not to export to Europe, because this is something that could harm, that could threaten the interests of Russia. And that's why the Turkmenistan, for example, has good relations with China, and the China is a good option for them. And they would like to change this, but it's not really, it would be very complicated, because Russia will have the objective to impeach this exportation, because it's something not good for the economy and for the interest of Russia.
Actually, this leads to one question related to the big neighbors in the neighborhood, Russia, Iran, and Turkey. How would you assess which country, for instance, has the greatest influence on Azerbaijan nowadays?
Oh, it depends. I think that the influence of Russia is declining, because just after the independence, Russia was the most important actor, most important neighbor for Azerbaijan. But now we have the feeling that Turkey is becoming a very, very important actor and neighbor for Azerbaijan. But at the same time, in the field of migration, Russia will be very important in the future, because you have a lot of people who migration from Azerbaijan in Russia. It's very important, and it continue. But in the field of military cooperation, I think that now Turkey is more active, more involved in the military cooperation with Azerbaijan than with Russia. And now the NATO country of Turkey has developed a sort of the NATO military culture with Azerbaijan, and we have seen the result of this modernization in the Karabakh War, where to be a sort of caricature, we have seen that how Armenia utilized very Russian weapons, and in opposition, Azerbaijan was very well equipped with NATO and more modern and Western weapons, and it was thanks to this difference that it was easier for Azerbaijan to be victorious. And this is something that Turkey will continue to cooperate to develop with Azerbaijan in the future.
Yeah, I essentially agree. Iran, I don't think you can say they don't have very much influence. In fact, they view Azerbaijan's alleged attempts to woo the ethnic Azeri population of northern Iran with quite a lot of suspicion. But then I think you get into the kind of attitudes versus reality on the ground influence. So in terms of attitudes, people, as I've said before, people in Azerbaijan are much more pro-Turkey than they are pro-Russia, I think. But of course, Russia has troops on the ground in Azerbaijani territory. It's basically, Nagorno-Karabakh is now basically a kind of Russian protectorate along the lines of South Ossetia, for example. And they still have immense cultural influence, but Turkey does increasingly too, linguistic influence, trading influence, and so on. So yeah, I think it's a case of the outgoing hegemon and the incoming potential wannabe hegemon, but it's still unclear whether it will actually become such.
Thank you very much. Actually, with the growing influence of Turkey in Azerbaijan, there is an interesting question related to the nowadays Turkey relationship with religion and this model. How does it transfer to Azerbaijan? Will we see a diffusion of Erdogan's vision of religion influence to Azerbaijan?
So this is a very complicated question, because in fact there is a difference of religion between Turkey and Azerbaijan. As I told you at the beginning of the seminar, that Turkey is in majority Sunni, where Azerbaijan is Shia, and because of this, I don't think that Turkey is going to try to convert to develop Sunnism in Azerbaijan, because they know that this is something very sensitive. This is the first one. The other question is that I think that Of course, the personal relation between Erdogan and Aliyev are not very good because Erdogan is conservative, he's more religious. Aliyev is more Soviet, more secular, and probably Aliyev, he doesn't want like Turkey to Islamize Azerbaijan. But at the same time, there is sort of realism in Turkey. They know that they will never be successful if they want to impose a sort of Islamic Turkish Islam version to Azerbaijan. That's why I think in the future, Turkey will cooperate with Azerbaijan without trying to impose a sort of Turkish Islam to Azerbaijan, because they know that Azerbaijan has its own traditions, and these traditions are important for the government, for the opposition, for the population, and the Turkish government is going to continue to respect these traditions.
Yeah, I'd also add that they're two different models of legitimacy, right? I don't know particularly about Turkey, but my impression is that the Erdogan regime or government in part derives its legitimacy from a sort of semi-theocratic interpretation of power, whereas the Aliyev regime and the kind of Azerbaijani government is the complete opposite. It has prided itself for a long time, sold itself as a bulwark of kind of against extremism, a very moderate country, very secular country. And, you know, you see very few people wearing veils, few women wearing veils in Baku, people eat pork, people drink vodka and so on. But they're two kind of diametrically opposed models of legitimacy, and I don't particularly see that changing.
Thank you. So I think in this specific topic, the question is of sovereignty is also at stake with religious influence from other countries. So I think now we have actually reached the time for our conference. So I want to address a big thanks to our participants and to our distinguished speaker. It has been a pleasure to discuss these issues in details with you. It really gave us a much detailed picture about the whole issues at stake for both international developments, but also the question of power transition in Azerbaijan. So thank you very much. And now I will give the floor to Anastasia, who will tell you a bit more about Eastern Circles as a whole. So yes, Anastasia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you so much for the speakers. Again, Bayram, Ido, thank you for coming, for sharing your insights. It was really a super exciting discussion, and I hope that everybody has enjoyed it as much as we did. Thank you for everybody who's joined. For those who are joining for the first time, just a word about Eastern Circles. It's a club of professionals working in or on the post-Soviet region, and we do monthly events this year on the topic of power transition, and also we give publishing opportunities to our members. We work with them with editorial work as well, and we give publishing opportunities via two of our partners. One is Regard sur l'Est, and the other is Diplomacy magazine, with whom we also have organized this conference. Please check it out. It's an excellent edition. This week, we have also launched a new initiative you might have seen, for those of you who are members, in your emails. It's a collaborative platform on Slack. Slack is a tool most of you must be familiar with. I guess it's like Teams or like Zoom. It's a collaborative platform, and we are using it to launch a debate and basically exchange either information or articles, conference invitations, or job opportunities in the region or on the region. And we have launched a proof of concept for the last 2 months. So when you're joining, there's going to be already a vibrant community and posts which you can use either for your research if you need a heads up on what's going on recently in the area. It's by country, it's by clusters of countries. Also, if you want to meet people who share these common interests, so please not hesitate. The screen then, our invitation was followed by a Slack invitation, and the screen looks like this. Click on join now, check it out, and then see if you would like to contribute. Now, the second announcement is about our next event. It's going to be on Kazakhstan, and we're going to talk about the handmade transition of Nursultan Nazarbayev. And rare precedent in the Soviet Union, a leader who had held power for about 30 years, stepping down voluntarily. We're going to look at how far down he really stepped and how far he is from the throne and what are the prospects of power transition in Kazakhstan. With three experts on the region, Catherine Pujol is a French historian on Central Asia and former director of the French Institute there, IFEA. Joanna Lilis is a correspondent for The Economist and The Guardian, living for the last over 10 years in Astana, the capital of Kazakhstan. And Dasim Satpayev is an expert who is in Kazakhstan, is a Kazakh expert on Kazakhstan and the region, who wrote multiple books on the region and is an analyst working closely, basically, with the government also, as well as with the Western organizations. So please come. I think it's going to be an exciting discussion. And I would like to conclude by thanking the team who prepared this conference today. It's the editorial team, of course, includes Eleanor Garnier, Gabriel Valli, Sophie Prantil, and Irina Sirpa, and myself, Anastasia Shapachkina. Thank you so much for coming and looking forward to seeing you in April. Bye-bye.